Let's talk about risk in detail. The purpose of a risk management is to reduce the overall project risk to a level that is acceptable to the project sponsor and other stakeholders. A project charter usually includes a risk matrix. A risk matrix will have a template like it should have the description of the risk that is to be taken care. It should talk about the type of risk, the probability and impact of the risk. It should classify the risk as a major, minor, or a medium risk. It should classify whether it is a non-risk or an unknown risk, such things. It should classify the containment, correction, and corrective action of the risk. It should talk about the preventive action of the risk. We should also assign the risk to a risk owner to investigate further. And this risk metric should also talk about the stage of the project lifecycle where the risk is happening. It should talk about the contingency plan or the backup plan, and it should assign the backup or the contingency plan to a contingency plan owner. It should also talk about the risk trigger. After all, the purpose of the risk management is to reduce the overall project risk to a level that is acceptable to the project sponsor and the other sponsors, other stakeholders. A risk can be anything that may impact the project team's ability to achieve the general project success measures, and specific project stakeholder priorities. A negative risk is also called a threat. Threat, according to PMBOK, is a condition or situation that is unfavorable to the project. Now, a risk can also be a positive risk. Project manager proactively seeks to eliminate or reduce the impact of threats and capitalizes the opportunities. A positive risk is also called as an opportunity. According to PMBOK, an opportunity is a condition or situation favorable to the project. A risk that will have a positive impact on a project objectives, if it occurs, is called as an opportunity. Risk management planning is the process of deciding how to approach, plan, and execute the risk management activities of a project. It is useful for communicating with project stakeholders and follow up analysis. A risk management plan is a document describing how the project risk management will be structured and performed on a project. Risk may be considered by association with a specific project lifecycle stage. That is why in the risk metrics template that we incorporate in a project charter, we often include the project lifecycle state or the stage at which this risk was uncovered and the stage at which this risk will occur. More project risks are uncovered early in the life of a project, and the risk uncovered late in a project can be expensive. The cost per risk discovered early is less. In fact, the further we go in the project life cycle to find the risk, the cost of the risk increases exponentially because we might have to undo a lot of things in the project if a risk is discovered after during the execution phase or during the closure phase. So a lot of rework has to be done. The number of risk discovered uh, decreases as we reach the closing phase, and the cost associated with a risk that is found further and further from the towards the end of the project life cycle, the cost increases exponentially. There are four categories of risk according to the uh, how much we know about the risk in terms of probability and the impact of the risk. A non-known risk is a risk whose probability is known and also the impact of the risk is known. A non-unknown risk is a risk whose probability is known but the impact is unknown. An unknown known risk is a risk whose probability is unknown but the impact is known. Finally, an unknown unknown risk is a risk whose probability and impact is unknown. It can occur as a surprise at the bad time. Non-known risk is always handled through estimation. Known unknown And unknown known risk is handled through contingency plan and contingency research. Unknown risk is handled through management reserve. A risk management is done so that we always we are always ahead of the risk. The risk should not overtake us. The later in the life cycle a risk occurs, the more costly it is. The owner of a contingency plan need not be the risk owner. With an available risk matrix, we know something is wrong. Risk management plans has to be strategized according to the type of project we are working. As we already know, a time constrained project work on a reverse clock. And the resource constrained project work on a forward clock. Forward clock. If we decide not to make a charter, we are starting without a foundation. A change in the charter has to come through a change management system. The 7-step approach to manage a risk is: identify the risk, classify the risk, analyze the risk, price the risk or give a score for each risk, prioritize the risk, then response planning. We need to have a response planning for each risk. That also talks about a contingency plan. Then we need to monitor and control the risk as a seventh point. These are the 7 steps in managing a risk. Here, the fourth step, that is a pricing the risk, is the step that quantifies the loss associated with the risk in monetary terms. A risk need to be prioritized, differentiated, and responded. We can't handle the risk, all the risk in the same way. We need to have we need to have specific risk response plan for each risk. Talks about some common triggers for a project. Some common triggers for a project risk is or are: uh, project manager displays a lack of self-esteem. The team members do not show enthusiasm for the project. The project was started with inadequate time for planning. No planning means we need to spend a lot of time in execution and in execution phase. Uh, Communication is overly general with little focus. Reports yield little information about true project status, or a little effort has been given to risk management. These are all indicators or these are all triggers for a project risk. For doing for performing risk analysis, we can have qualitative risk analysis, we can have quantitative risk analysis, we have the quantitative techniques in risk analysis. We should also update the risk registers. Qualitative analysis of the risk talks about how likely is a risk to happen, the frequency of occurrence of a risk. How big will the impact be? Is it a major risk? Is it a minor risk? Or is it a medium risk? When is the risk likely to occur? The conditions at which the risk will occur. How easy will it be to notice and correct and interpret the trigger? According to PMBOK, the qualitative risk analysis is the process of prioritizing risk for subsequent further analysis or action by assessing and combining their probability and impact. Bigger, more complex and riskier and more expensive projects may benefit from the rigor of quantitative structured techniques. Use quantitative techniques when it is critical to predict the probability of completing a project on time, on budget, at the agreed upon scope and agreed upon quality. Quantitative risk analysis is the process of numerically analyzing the effect of overall project objectives of identified risk. Our response to risk differ, but the focus of intervention lies among these six categories. Uh, we can we can choose the strategy of how we are going to manage or handle a risk. That will lie among these six following categories. We can either avoid a risk, we can transfer the risk, we can mitigate or accept, or we can research or we can exploit a risk. First, let's talk about avoiding a risk. We might not be able to do this avoid strategy on a major risk, but commonly we use this avoid strategy for a threat, that is a negative risk. An example is to change the project plan or scope, or doing some improvements like improve the project communication or deciding not to perform the project. These are some examples of how we can avoid a risk. Another strategy is to transfer the risk. Transferring risk also is usually done for threats or a negative risk. For example, we can outsource the risk, outsource that activity to another firm or something. Thereby, we are transferring the risk. Maybe if it's a technology risk, we are transferring the technology risk to another entity. Next is mitigating risk. We can reduce the probability of the risk from happening. We can be ahead of risk and we can put a backup plan. Example, funding risk. This is also usually done for a threat or a negative risk. Fourth strategy is to accept the risk. This can be done for a threat and an opportunity. It is a strategy where we face it head on and we think that we should be able to manage it. For example, we establish the triggers and update it frequently. That's how we accept the risk and we plan to manage the risk when we face it. Another strategy is research the risk. That is about understanding it from the past projects. It is gathering more information, verifying the assumptions, and using the prototype. Another strategy is to exploit the risk. The research strategy is also applicable for both opportunities and threats. Now, next strategy is exploit the risk. It is exploit is to use it for good. It is usually used for a positive risk or an opportunity. For example, we increase the probability and or impact of the opportunity, give more emphasis on the project. After all, the purpose of the risk management is to reduce the risk level to an acceptable level for the stakeholders and sponsors. This is a 7-step approach to risk management. First, we need to identify the risk. Next, after that, we need to classify the risk. Then we need to analyze it. We need to price the risk, that is, make a scoring model for the risk. Then, based on that, we need to prioritize the risk. After that, we need to make a response planning, and then we need to monitor and control the risk. We already discussed these financial measures, the expected value of NPV, standard deviation of NPV, range, semi-variance, semi-standard deviation, etc. The methods for risk analysis include simulation, FMEA, decision tree EMV, sensitivity analysis, one variable at a time. We check how the other parameters vary by varying one parameter or a variable. That is called a sensitivity analysis. Then we have scenario analysis, BE analysis, break-even analysis, Hiller model. Sensitivity analysis is checking the effect of one variable at a time on another variable. Example, plot of NPV with respect to discounted rate for a project. We are checking how the NPV is changing by varying the discounted rate. Scenario analysis is about predicting several possible scenarios at the same time. It is used in multivariate tool. Hiller model is also used in forecasting. Practical risk management actions include maintaining decent ratio of fixed cost to variable cost, putting a element of price and recovery. Information accuracy has to be increased. Debt and equity, understanding the best combination of debt and equity and leveraging the best option. Risk adjusted discounted rate, RADR. It is by putting an adjustment of 1% or so in a discounted rate. We can bring in a subjectivity in the financial approach by adding a certainty equivalent coefficient. We can use buffers and parallel estimation. We have heard of safety stock and safety margin. We can use a combination of financial measures like NPV, IRR, etc. We can use a combination. We can use a index called as acceptable overall certainty index. We can use multiple probabilistic estimates, etc. The aim of a project management process is to ensure quality in our deliverables. Let's talk more about quality planning and project kickoff. Quality planning includes all the necessary work to ensure the project deliverables satisfy their intended purpose. Simple. The first step in project quality management is quality planning. Quality planning may be performed simultaneously with other aspects of project planning. Quality planning, according to PMBOK, is the process of identifying which quality standards are relevant to the project and how to satisfy them. Now, the first set of processes in product quality management is defining quality. Defining quality means coming out with project standards in processes, deliverables, inputs, etc. In in the outputs that are deliverable, in the specification of the output, etc. The next one is to control quality or controlling quality. Controlling quality deals with measuring the variances with respect to specifications. How much of a variance does the deliverables show with respect to the specification? For this, we use control charts and inspection. And the output of this controlling quality phase is quality control plan. Then we have the assuring quality. In controlling, we are allowing error to happen and find the error as variance. In controlling quality, we are trying to catch the defects or the anomalies. But in assurance, we don't let the error to happen. We keep a mechanism to assure that defects does not happen. You might have heard about Pokeyoke. The output of assuring quality phase is quality assurance plan. After that, we have delivering quality. The set of processes in delivering quality are uh, to make sure our quality plans are in action, etc. And the output of delivering quality phase is what the floor needs to do to make it in action. After that, we have improving quality process. And then we have planning quality. That includes processes involved in planning the quality. And the planning quality phase will have the output called QMS, Quality Management System. DMAIC is a continuous circular flow used as a method for implementing continuous improvement. DMAIC stands for Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, and Control. It's a framework used to control and plan and manage improvements in projects. Now, this is the complete cycle of the DMAIC methodology. First, we need to define the problem, the scope of the problem, the goals. We need to determine the customer needs and establish the team and resources. Then we measure and create the data collection plan. We make the current process and we make the baseline and current performance. After that, we analyze, we benchmark and we perform data analysis and root cause analysis. We even come up with fishbone diagrams. After that, we control, we identify the solution and we perform the risk assessment and solution pilot. After that, uh, that is a baseline project. We monitor the baseline pilot performance and create the procedures and documentations. And we roll out the solution to a larger organization. The four basic principles in making sure our performance with respect to quality is perfect are: one, stakeholder satisfaction; two, process management. That is, process should have quality. Three, fact-based management. Four, empowered performance. That is, people should be empowered to take right decisions at the right time. So the stakeholder satisfaction talks about identifying all the internal and external stakeholders, prioritizing and understanding the prioritized stakeholders, developing the standards to ensure the requirements are met, making trade-off decisions, Realizing the stakeholders will judge quality both of your project work, process, and deliverable. It is also about developing capable customers and meeting the requirements, but exceeding expectations, etc. Next is process management. It is about learning about the process with supplier input, process output, customer model. It is about ensuring project process are capable and flexible. It's about controlling the project process to make them predictable. Designing a quality process is far better than merely trying to find mistakes. Next is fact-based management. It is about understanding the difference between common and special cause of variation and selecting a few key well-defined items to measure. It encourages truth, transparent, and challenging communication when making project decisions. Next is empowered performance. It's about developing capable and willing workers at every level and every function within a company. It's about developing a risk-taking project culture and understanding each person in an individual. It's about sharing the lessons learned and other information very wisely and widely as possible. Project quality management plan has SOP, statement of purpose, uh, project policy, assurance plan, quality plan, document of and records, procurement of items and services, corrective action, procedures, quality management system, personal qualification and training plan, implementation plan of work processes, etc. Once all the stakeholders of a project have been identified and the project team members develop a scope management plan, they assess the project requirement and develop the project scope. This includes they will create a work breakdown structure also. Later, they develop a plan scope management. A plan scope management is a process of developing a plan that includes the total scope of what needs to be done and what is executed and excluded from the project. A project charter is an informal contract between the project team and the sponsor. A contract between two or more parties entered freely into. There shouldn't be a pressure. And a contract cannot arbitrarily be changed. A contract offers something of value for each party, and it's a living document that can evolve with changing conditions. If both parties agree and receive something of value for making the change. Signing of a project charter represents the transition from the project initiation stage to the project planning stage. Four main purposes of project charter are: it can authorize the project manager to proceed. It can help the project team and the sponsor to develop a common understanding. Project charter also helps the project team and the sponsor to commit. A project charter quickly screen out obviously poor project. Project manager can apply resources into a project and plan the project activities only if a project is authorized. The project charter authorizes the commitment of resources to the project. It also gives the project and the project manager official status within the parent organization. Once a project charter is signed, we have a set of common understanding that are developed, like teamwork gets developed. There will be an agreement of trust, communication, and commitment between the sponsor and the project manager and the team members to develop the project. Project team does not worry if management will accept a decision. The sponsor is less likely to unilaterally change the original agreement. Now, a preliminary scope statement is an elaboration of the charter. For small projects, the preliminary scope statement may be part of the project charter, whereas for a large project, the scope statement and the project charter are distinct documents. Some elements of a project charter include title, scope review, business case, background, milestone, schedule, budget. Then there will be signature and commitment, some lessons learned, things that they should avoid, etc. In different projects, the term project charter may be substituted with different terms like project request or a project submission form or a project pre-planning form, etc. A project charter is a high level what and why of the project. It's an elevator speech, what needs to be accomplished and how it will be done. And it's used to help prevent scope creep. It is considered to be the project boundaries. Scope creep is a phenomenon of adding features and functionality without addressing the effect of time, cost, or resources, and without a customer's approval. Business case is a project purpose or justification statement. The answers of the question of whys. Why should we do the project? There should be a clear business case for the initiation of a project, for of any project. This business case is used to justify the necessity of the project. It should clearly tie the project to the organization strategy. It may be just a rational or include high level estimates of the cost and benefits of the project. It should persuade the decision makers to support the project and inspire the team members to work hard on it. Background statement is optional in a project charter. A background statement is used to provide more detail to support scope statement and a business case statement. Milestone schedule with acceptance criteria divides the project into 3 to 8 intermediate points whose completion can be verified. It lists major milestones and deliverables. Acceptance criteria are those criteria, including the performance requirements and essential conditions, which must be met before project deliverables are accepted. A milestone schedule with acceptance criteria is a column for acceptance criteria that helps determine who will judge the quality of the deliverables and by what criteria. Acceptance criteria represents the project's vital signs, what all should be satisfied for the completion of a project deliverables. A risk is any uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on a project objectives. An assumption is a factor that is used for planning purposes, and they are considered to be true, real, or certain without proof of demonstration. Project teams frequently identify documents and validate assumptions as part of their planning process. Assumptions generally involve a degree of risk. Constraints is an applicable restriction or limitation, either internal or external, to a project. Uh, it is something that will affect the performance of a project. Risk assumptions and constraints reminds us of what could prevent successful completion of a project. It shows us more comprehensive and more likely to discover problems before they even occur. It showing us the impact of what will happen if a false assumption becomes a risk. It lets us plan beforehand of a constraint that limits money, time, and resources that is a risk. Any risk that may inhibit successful project completion needs to be identified and a plan must be developed to overcome it. A risk that can create a positive effect on a project can be considered an opportunity. Contingency plans are developed for each major identified risk to lessen the probability of risk or to reduce the impact of the risk. An owner is assigned responsibility for each contingency plan. Proper approvals needs to be in place for a budget and estimate. Preliminary budget should have the level of confidence in the estimate. If we identify the expenses, the project manager can authorize or the sponsor needs to control. That accounts for proper planning. Some internal projects even do not develop formal budgets. Broad communication plan needs to be outlined in the project charter. Each stakeholder should be identified along with what information each needs to know from us and what information we need to learn from each stakeholder. When should a communication take place and by what method? What method is most effective or efficient that helps the receiver of each item or each stakeholder of information to understand and act appropriately. A set of team operating principles need to be established to enhance the team functioning, keeping the goal in mind to increase the team effectiveness. This should ensure that all parties are aware of what is expected. Useful team operating principles deal with conducting meetings, making decisions, accomplishing work, and treating each other with respect. A learning gained from the process of performing a project is called as lessons learned. Success and failures of previous projects become a practical advice for the current project. It helps us avoid the risk of repeating mistakes from the previous projects. PMBOK framework strongly suggests that we need to create a lessons learned knowledge base, like a store of historical information and lessons learned about both the outcomes of previous project selection and the decisions and previous project performance. What happened and how, what was the impact and how can it be mitigated? What is the cost of it, etc. And finally, we should have a set contract on who is involved and the extent to which each person can make decisions and what is the expected time commitment for each person. The project sponsor, project manager, and the core team members show their commitment by signing the project chart. It is helpful if the sponsor creates the first draft of the project charter. The organization's leadership team may contribute information in addition to the business case and the scope review. 1 to 4 sentences should be written for the scope review, overview, and the business case. This is an example of a scope review. It should be precise and it should be clear to the readers. This is an example of milestone schedule with acceptance criteria. This also serves as a template. 6 steps for constructing a milestone are: briefly describe the current situation that requires the project, then describe the project at its successful completion, and describe the acceptance criteria for the final project deliverables. During the risk assessment phase, we brainstorm all the things that could pose a risk to the schedule. What are the things that pose a risk to the budget, usefulness of the deliverables, the stakeholder satisfaction, etc. Assumptions are especially important when a cross-functional team is performing the project. We need to quantify risk on one of the several dimensions, like probability of occurring, impact if realized, uh, what is the time of probable occurrence, how many times it can occur, the ability to detect if it occurs. According to these parameters, we decide which risk should be considered major, and a major risk requires a formal contingency plan. This is an example of risk contingency plan. It can also serve as a template. A limit of spending authority for the project manager is often developed as part of spending approval. This is an example of the spending approval. Project manager and the team list each stakeholder and work through the milestone schedules and the risk to determine the communication. The project manager and the team should also consider their own communication needs. This is an example of a communication plan. You can clearly see the stakeholder who learns from it and who will it be shared with, what is the timing and what is the method of communication. These are a set of instructions for creating a team operating principle. Establish how meetings will be conducted, establish how decisions will be made, and establish how work gets done. Establish how everyone will treat each other with respect. While formulating the lessons learned, we need to consider what has worked well and what went poorly. Each project should report lessons learned at key reviews and project completion phases. We make the lessons available in a lessons learned knowledge base, and the more specific the lessons, the more likely they will be found useful. This is an example of project learned document or a knowledge base. Finally, the project manager and the team formally present the project charter to the sponsor for approval. After all, sponsor approves the project charter and it is a final say. Questions are presented for clarification and agreement, and the sponsor, project manager, and the core team signs the project charter.